Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Failing Doesn't Suck, How to Rejoice in Your Facepalm Moments. My name is Danielle Olivier, Business Development Manager at AccuSource, and I will be your moderator today. I would like to review a few housekeeping details before we get started. Today's webinar qualifies for 1 hour of HRCI and 1 hour of SHRM credit. To qualify for a credit certificate, you must be present for the full duration of the live webinar. The presentation will run approximately 15 minutes with a 10-minute Q&A session to follow. Please submit any questions via the chat option. We will answer as many live questions as time permits. Any questions not answered during the live, a member of our team will follow up with you post-webinar. A link to this recording of this presentation will also be sent to each attendee within 24 to 48 hours. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's presenter, Chris Dyer, best-selling author, radio show host, and Chief Marketing Officer at People G2. As a highly sought-after keynote speaker, consultant, and advisor, Chris brings a unique perspective from his experience in building, leading, and exiting successful organizations. Through his research from 2 best-selling books, he is always engaged in leading companies to help transform their culture, leadership, and flexible work strategies. He is also the host of a popular radio show, Talent Talk, where he has led hundreds of conversations with the world's best leaders for his audience of over 3 million annual listeners. Chris is the founder of People G2, an AccuSource company. People G2 is a fully remote organization, is routinely ranked one of the best places to work, and has been listed 5 times as one of Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing companies. Chris enjoys contributing to leadership conversation, has been featured by leading media outlets including the BBC, Fox News, NBC, Telegraph, The Sun, Inc., and Forbes. He has delivered keynote speeches and worked as a consultant for top brands like Johnson & Johnson, Citi, IKEA, Kelly Services, the United States Patent Office, the United Kingdom's Health, Science, and the Ministry of Defense, as well as other top firms like Farmers Insurance and Cornerstone On Demand. He is listed a top 50 global thought leader for PeopleHum and a top leadership voice on PeopleHum. Chris is married to his high school sweetheart and has 3 adopted children and 1 grandson. Now we'll turn the presentation to Chris.
Thank you, Danielle, and I'm excited that so many of you are here today. We had a wonderful webinar last month, and this month I'm expecting it to go just as well. So thank you all for being here and for that wonderful introduction. So today we're going to talk about failure. We're going to talk about mistakes. We're going to talk about errors, and I'm going to hopefully give you some context, some stories that you might enjoy, but also some really tactical knowledge on understanding what the differences are, how to leverage it, how to remove the stuff that we want to get rid of as leaders, and maybe keep the things that we want to keep. So this won't just be a high strategic conversation. This will also kind of get down into the weeds and really help us understand some different tactical things that we can do. Now, we at People G2 have always focused on lots of different areas, but mistakes is an area I think that's always helped us be really unique and really kind of drive a lot of innovation, because we talk about our mistakes, we celebrate our mistakes, we're not afraid to make mistakes, and I'm going to kind of show you how we do that in this presentation. And I think it's why we are consistently named a best place to work. I think it's why we have been growing so fast especially over the last 5-6 years. We've been able to receive lots of awards and attention because we are willing to kind of put ourselves out there. And from my first book, I actually list mistakes as one of the key pillars for those companies that we studied, that if they knew how to deal with mistakes correctly, they always tended to be a top culture, a top performing company. And this is often when I work with organizations or I maybe go in and speak to them, they will maybe say, well, we're good at 2 or 3, and we're not so good at maybe 2 or 3 of these pillars that you've mentioned, Chris. And always mistakes is in that bucket of we don't deal with those very well, right? We have a hard time allowing our people to make mistakes, or having managers not doing things that kind of squash innovation or creativity for their people. This is always an area of focus. So hopefully today we can really dive into some of the areas that will be important to you. So this really has become a top trend sort of in the future of work. And how do we drive more innovation into our organizations? So I want to really start this off by telling you a very personal story of something that happened to me, where it really helped me solidify and understand the difference between a mistake and an error. Because I am advocating that you celebrate, you enjoy, you appreciate, you do everything you can to allow your people to make mistakes, and to use those as growing opportunities, as coaching opportunities. But that is not the same thing as an error. And we want to eliminate errors, and we don't want errors inside of our organizations. We don't allow people who continue to make errors over and over and over again. That is different. And that's where I think we get really mixed up, where somebody has made an error, and we should be challenging that, punishing that, whatever that is. But someone makes a mistake and we put the exact same sort of filter on them when they should have been celebrated, they should have been rewarded, we should have learned from it in a positive way. So this is a picture of a gentleman on the second longest zip line in the world in Portugal. Now that's not me, but I was just like that guy there, just like that gentleman. I was strapped to that line. And to give you a little bit of understanding, in fact, I have a video here, and I'm going to show you as I explain some of this. I'm going to show you what this looks like. So you start on this contraption. They drive you over from one hill to the other. It takes about 25 minutes, and they strap you on here, and they release you. And very quickly, you get up to speeds of like 100 miles an hour. And so if you can easily see this video, you might be realizing that it's a little high, it's a little fast, but it's also beautiful. And you can look around and see the beautiful Douro Valley. This is just north of Porto in Portugal. And, it's an enjoyable ride. But I had seen this video. I had seen the videos of my friends who actually had done this the day before. I had missed out on going, but they had such a great time. I said, can we please go back? I would love to do this. And they said, sure. So I had seen their videos. Now, in their videos, they're going very quick. They're going very fast. They had a great time. It was beautiful and sunny like it is here. Now, remember that road there. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But when I was there, it was rainy, and it was a little bit cold, and it was a little bit windy. And so my experience was a little bit different. Now notice as you come into here, how fast this person is moving, right? And they kind of stop and they pull you off of this line. And it's a great ride typically. But in my case, what happened, and I'm going to show you this little video. This is actually me. And you may not realize, you can't quite see me yet, but I'll be there in a moment. I'm not coming in as fast as what you just saw. In fact, I begin to slow down quite a bit the last third of this ride. And I'm starting to come into focus here, and I'm not going fast. I'm going quite slow. And they begin to yell to me. They're trying to communicate to me in English and some Portuguese. It was a little struggle. They're trying to bend the line. And now this gentleman on the bottom left you're going to see is going to try to hand me a stick. He's going to try to save me, but I can't reach it. And so they yell, please wait a moment. Please wait a moment for what? Well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen now? Well, I begin to slowly, ever so slowly, go backwards. In fact, I creep all the way back, as I promised, back to this little road. It took about 10 minutes or so, maybe a little less, but it took quite a while for me to slowly go back to this sort of droop in the line where I stopped. And then I felt them sort of something like shake on the line. I thought, well, maybe I'll go forward again. I didn't. And here I am staring at this road. occasionally watching a car or a truck go by, wondering if this is it. Have I met my end? Will I die on that road below me? And how much longer can I sit in this contraption? How much longer can I lay here, right? In this sort of Superman position. And ultimately, I was safe. There was nothing I could have done to have fallen, but I didn't know that. And so in the front part of my brain, I remember rationalizing, it's okay. They must have a plan. I'm sure they'll figure out what to do. In the back part of my brain, I'm going to die. This is it. Why did I ever do this? This is the stupidest thing I've ever done. I mean, you're sort of arguing with myself, right? Calm down. It's going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay. You're going to die. And as I'm just dangling right above this road, well, suddenly I feel a buzz on the line. Now, my wife decided to come along, and she decided to go on this. At the last possible moment, she decided to do it. She was very apprehensive about doing it. And she was next up. And I thought in my brain, oh no, they've sent her down the line. I'm now worried that she's going to hit me. She's going to ram right into me as I'm stuck on this line. So again, that's the fear in the back of my brain. In the front of my brain, wait, they have radios. They must have told somebody. Now, while this is happening, up at the top, they actually didn't send my wife. So I wasn't going to get in trouble, have to hear it all the way home in the car. They turned to my friends and said, your friend didn't make it. Now, there was sort of a language barrier here, and then for a moment, they freaked out and thought that that meant I had died or something, and they realized what he meant was I didn't make it all the way down the line. Turns out that buzzing on the line was just a very brave and very strong gentleman who put himself on the line, and he manually pulled himself all the way out to get me, hooked me up, said, okay? And I said, okay. And he had to pull both of us back uphill all the way to that landing area that you saw. Now, as I finally got there, and this poor man is drenched in sweat, and I'm just exhausted from all the anxiety and fear and everything that happened. And just as I put my feet down on the ground, thinking this moment would never come, the manager was standing right there and said, don't worry, you can go again for free. Now, maybe another day, maybe another trip, I'll go back on it and enjoy it the way it was intended to be done. But I said, no way. Now, if we look at this example, do you think they made a mistake or did they make an error? So the reason that I did not make it all the way down the line was that the parachute that's on your back to help you kind of slow down at the end, they miscalculated, or they didn't miscalculate, they calculated, and then they came up with their best guess for what that parachute should be based on the conditions and what they knew. It turns out there was a lot more wind in the middle of the canyon than there normally is. But they have no way of knowing how much wind is there. There's nothing in the middle of the canyon there that can gauge the wind up at the top where you're at. The employees do not have the tools available for them to make a perfect estimation every time. And when I realized this in talking to them, this was just a mistake. They did their absolute best to calculate what should have happened, but they did not have the tools to make a better guess than what happened. And as it turns out, this can happen sometimes to the first person of the day, especially if the weather is a little bit off, and I was that unlucky person. And now they were able to make adjustments, and everyone behind me, all my friends and family had the time of their life and loved it and wanted to go again and again. But this was a mistake, not an error. Now, if I had gotten off this line and yelled and screamed at people and demanded someone lose their job, that would have been very unfair of me because they did the absolute best they could. There was no way they could have made a better decision with the lack of information that they had. So this was really became very clear to me. There was kind of two ways that we could have gone here, right? And as a leader in an organization, if we don't understand if this is a mistake or an error, it's very easy for us to make the wrong assumptions and to implement the wrong strategy as to what we should do next. You know, is this a learning opportunity, or is this something we should write somebody up or fire them for, right? So ultimately, I had to thank them for taking care of me, keeping me safe. I did not accept a refund. I did not go again, but they did the best they could. And that is often the scenario so many times in our organizations, and we need to understand that and be able to reward it. So let's kind of dive in here and talk about, where do errors come from? These are the things that we don't want, right? We want to remove and keep out of our organizations. Well, the first one is from multitasking, and I will tell you, I am guilty of this one. In fact, probably every time anyone's ever received an email from me where I misspelled a word or used the wrong word, maybe the wrong there or the wrong to or something like that, I was probably multitasking, right? That's an error. I should be able to correct that. I should not put myself in that position by trying to do so many things at one time that I become a little careless, right? I don't read over the email or catch my error. The next one is just from being careless, right? So errors come from when people are careless with maybe what they're doing, how they're doing it, the equipment that they're using, right? So if someone doesn't care enough, then that's where those errors come from. And those, if you have identified that as the issue, then that's something we really do want to weed out. It's not something we want to accept or celebrate or learn from. This is, if they're being careless, that can cause people quite a bit of bad outcomes. And there was been some really interesting studies around mistakes and errors as it relates to medications inside hospitals. And what they found was that people believed it was often carelessness, but it was not that. It was more likely to be multitasking is the issue versus carelessness. But there was a certain level of people that may have been careless, and they could identify that as a subgroup. The other one that they identified for those nurses in giving out medications that where there was problems or errors was overwork. I'm sure you all have had those days where maybe, man, it was just a long day. You worked way too many hours. You did way too much, and you made an error, right? Sent that bad email, didn't catch that spelling error on the PowerPoint, you forgot to get something to your boss, right? All these things that are errors that we could correct that we know we should not have done. Overwork, multitasking, and carelessness are generally those biggest factors. Now, some of the other ones that are surprising that I think people don't often remember is that errors also come from a lack of aptitude, meaning a lack of training. So if you ask me to perform brain surgery, I'm going to make a lot of errors because I've never done that before, right? I don't have the training. I don't know how to do any of those things. I should clearly screw that all up because I don't have the aptitude. If we are seeing that someone is continuing to make an error inside of our companies, that is, and they're not multitasking and they're not being careless, they're trying their best, but they keep having these errors, it could be an aptitude problem. It could be that a lack of training. It could be this is maybe not the right job for them if they are not able to level up and skill up to be able to do the job correctly. But it is a really good place for us to put some energy and make sure that we have identified this. So we talked about where errors come from. Now let's talk about where mistakes come from. So mistakes come from when we're talking about good mistakes, right? We're talking about good things that happen. They come from innovation. Now this you might recognize as one of the Dyson vacuums. The inventor Dyson talked about how every iteration of his vacuum was a failure. He had thousands of failures. I think it was something like almost 2,000 failures, and until he finally got it, until that vacuum finally became a product that was not only worthy of becoming a product, but superior to what else was on the market. And so he failed over and over and over. Every mistake he learned from, and every mistake he was able to build upon and celebrate and figure out a new way of doing it. But that's innovation. I mean, like none of us would punish Mr. Dyson for those nearly 2,000 mistakes. That was a part of the process. But for some reason, we don't put that kind of lens or that kind of language onto our people when they're doing maybe more mundane tasks that aren't inventing a new type of vacuum. You know, if someone in customer service makes a mistake, were they trying to do something new? Were they trying to figure something out? Were they trying to solve a new problem that they had never seen before? That's innovation. Did a client come to them with something they had never even thought about? And maybe what they came up with did not work. That's a mistake. We can learn from that, right? As opposed to an error where they should be punished. The next area mistakes come from is just from new ideas, right? When we have new and fresh ideas, we have to test them. We have to figure them out. We have to decide if they are a viable, good idea or just a bad idea. And so mistakes come out of that trial and error process. Again, that client coming to you with a brand new problem, a brand new issue that no one's ever heard of or no one's ever dealt with, you might try some different approaches and some of those may not work out. And I would argue those are mistakes that we learn from, that we celebrate, that we appreciate, and that we talk about openly and with transparency so that everyone can learn from them. So if you're wondering why people aren't coming to you with new ideas in your company, it could be because you are squashing those mistakes. So they are afraid to try the new idea and make a mistake because of what will happen to them, how they'll be seen, how they'll be punished, what negative things will come their way. The next area that mistakes come from is confusion. So if the problem is not articulated properly, if the variables that we are dealing with are not understood, right, we will make mistakes. And so confusion is this, we thought we understood everything we needed to understand. We went and tried something, it did not work, and now we realize we were confused about something. I once had an employee that everyone thought had made an error. They thought they had done something wrong that cost us a lot of money. And people were really upset. And they even said, geez, should we fire this person? Should we punish this person? And I said, well, let's go back and let's understand what happened. And it turned out that our client had given them really bad information. They had provided them some really information that was pretty, not terrible, but it wasn't intentionally wrong, but it was pretty wrong. And so our employee, trying to do their best, essentially was confused about what was the right thing to do. And when I looked at the situation and I said, if I only knew these bits of information, I probably would have made the same exact decision that this employee made. They made a mistake, not an error. And we're not going to punish them. We're going to celebrate the fact that they were willing to admit it, willing to talk about it. And we made sure we went back and used that as a teaching opportunity in the organization on how we could do better next time, how we could vet the information better next time. And everyone understood so that we didn't ever have another one of those costly scenarios again. We could have just as easily fired that person, not learned from our mistake, and had it happen again and again, and have people be afraid and fearful that if something doesn't go perfectly, that they're going to be punished as well, right? And that sort of negative energy is not the kind of organization that I ever want to be a part of or want to lead. So we want to make sure that we're very clear as to whether or not there was clarity for all the variables that somebody was dealing with at the time they made their decision. Another place that mistakes happen is inside of systems. So if a system is bad, if there's a bad system that can cause employees to make mistakes, we need to change the system. We need to identify and realize that maybe the process in place, this could be a software, this could be a written down process, this could be just there's some sort of system that is causing the mistake. It's not that somebody is being careless. It's that maybe somehow your Salesforce is sending the wrong lead to the wrong person, right? That could be a system. And so we need to go back and correct the system. And we have to talk about, well, why is this happening? How is it happening? Where is it happening? And get it out and be transparent about it, instead of blaming somebody who maybe was a part of that original creation. We need to just identify where in the system is it broken and make that change so that we can go forward and not have that happen anymore. This is a very, very common one. And what we notice is that when the system is broken, we sometimes will blame the person who is in charge of the system and call it an error and get mad at them. Instead, we just need to fix the system, celebrate the mistake, talk about how not to have that happen again, and that will allow that person and the organization to be more open about other places that they're seeing the system not working. Because ultimately what we want is for everything to be working right. We want our companies to function, our people to be happy, our clients to be even happier, right? We want all this to work great, but we have to make sure that what's not working can bubble up to the top so we can change it, fix it, come up with new ways to do it. And if we're not going to be open and honest about how the system isn't working, then it's going to be really a challenge for us to ever get to that utopia that I'm sort of advocating for here. The next place that mistakes come from is in high stakes situations. You might, if any of you enjoy poker, or maybe you enjoy sports, right? You may have noticed that, let's just use basketball. You might be down by 10 points, right? In the NBA championship, and it's game 7. You're probably going to try some things at the very end of that game if you're losing that you wouldn't normally do in the average game, because you're down by enough. You're taking big risks for a big reward because the situation calls for it. In business, we have this too. There may be opportunities, investments, acquisitions. There may be, hey, this giant client really wants you to try this thing, and we're going to try to do it to see if we can land them. And it's a high stakes situation, and it doesn't work out because we don't have enough time, enough resources to really make it happen, right? But these are good opportunities. And and often this is one that people understand that it may not work out. We understand that it is a high stakes. And so there's less pressure here to get it totally right. No one feels like they're going to be fired if they don't get it right, because we understand this is an unusual situation. But it is good to remember to identify, if we think this is a high stakes situation, that we want our people to try to score 10 points at the end of the game very quickly, right? We want them to try to come up with the big ideas and the big solutions, and maybe do or suggest some things they wouldn't normally suggest because the situation is different. So how do we capitalize on mistakes, right? I love this quote by Bruce Lee, that mistakes are always forgivable if one has the courage to admit them. So that's the first part. We have to create an environment where our people, our leaders, are willing to raise their hand and say, I made a mistake. This did not go the way I thought it was going to go. And here's how, and here's why, and this is what we're going to do to fix it, right? But we have to be willing to admit them. That is step one. And if people can't admit them, if there is not the kind of environment at your company to allow them to admit it, that's where you got to start. Is how do we create that psychological safety? I would love to tell the story. I'm sure you all recognize this very well-known Post-it note. And I don't know if you all know how the Post-it note came to be. It turns out it was a mistake. So here's how the story goes. There was a gentleman who was in charge of making a new glue, and he made a glue so bad, right? It was barely sticky, that it was essentially a mistake. It was a total failure. Now, ultimately, he ended up creating the right glue that he needed for whatever other project. But 3M is insistent and rabid about documenting every outcome of every experiment, of every failure, of every mistake. They document, they put it in a database, and they keep it. They think it's important to remember what we did and how we did it. Years later, another one of their scientists needed a way to take a piece of paper, a hymnal, where he wanted to be able to put it onto a stand that would stay there during his choir practice at his church. And so he went in the database to try to find a glue, and he found that glue that years before had been a mistake. And this glue is so simple, it's so light. He could put it on the back of the paper and it would stick to the surface, but he could still pull it off. It didn't stick so much that it would damage it, right? And that entire process, right? We could have fired the first scientist for making such a terrible glue. And instead that mistake was documented and somebody else was able to take that idea and put it onto a new use case. And now this is the most popular, the most profitable thing that 3M sells into the consumer markets, right? So this started with their chairman, William McKnight. And he was very, very intentional about talking about how we need to give people room to make mistakes. We need to not be critical of their mistakes, that it kills initiative inside of companies. And so if you just want a bunch of sheep running around, yeah, you should be critical of them, right? Of errors. So we have to be really, really intentional about how we deal with what happens on a day-to-day basis or when people try new things. It is super important that we really think about that, so we encourage that difference in that culture. So how do we continue to capitalize on this? The big thing is, I have found that with many things, it's important from a cultural standpoint that we go from the bottom up, right? That the average person has to be on board with this in our companies, and we build that momentum up. With mistakes, I find this is the one area where it is the complete opposite. It must be top down. Our leaders must show that they can admit their mistakes, that they're willing to raise their hands and say, I didn't get this right, and here's how we're going to fix it. Here's what we're going to do differently, and this is what I learned. This has to go top down, because if the leaders aren't doing it, why in the heck would anybody else raise their hand and go, well, I screwed that one up, right? It has to be top down. Then we need to really make sure we accentuate the positive. So why was it a good thing that this happened? What did we learn, right? Maybe this mistake happened. Maybe it cost us some money. Maybe it cost us a client. But why was it a good thing? How will this turn into something we can use later on for our benefit, to help our company grow, to help us be better, to help us whatever that outcome is? What can we learn? What was good out of this? And that is the first place you should start. Before we talk about, well, what else would we do differently? What were the outcomes? Maybe what were some of the negatives? But what is possibly is good that could have come out of this? And sometimes that is identifiable right away. Sometimes it's not till later, but it's important to bring that up once we've identified it. The next one is that we want to capitalize, on our mistakes in a way that allows us to appreciate the process. So I love in Scrum and Agile, they always want you to have a retrospective. So you do a sprint, which is like a week or 2 weeks of work, where you're trying to do a dedicated task around a dedicated part of a process. It could be software, it could be a project. But at the end of that sprint sequence, so let's just say you're going to work hard for a week on this project before you reevaluate what needs to be worked on next week. At the end of that week, you should have a retrospective, which is basically what went well, what will we do differently, where is there a room for improvement? And this is the place where we would say, I tried it this way a few times and it just didn't work. Oh, and people would talk about that. Why didn't it work? Well, maybe we can avoid that next time. Or somebody say, oh, you tried it that way, but did you use this? Oh, if you use that, well, then it would work, right? So it gives them an opportunity to talk about what we tried and what worked and what didn't work. The retrospective is fantastic. If you can, even if you're not running Scrum and Agile, or you don't know what that word is, that's fine. Think about at the end of a project with your team, if you're working on something specific, just to have a quick 15-minute meeting to say what worked, what could we do better, what do we want to do differently for the next week. And this is an area we often just kind of ignore. We're tired of meetings, or we just don't want to have to think about it that way. We don't want to have a slightly uncomfortable conversation about that, right? We don't just pretend that everything went well. That's not going to help you be a top organization. You have to be willing to talk about what didn't work and how we're going to be different going forward. We want to make sure that we understand that right is a relative term, it's subjective. So just because you think you know the right direction, just because you believe that this is the answer or this is the best way to do something, you should continue A/B testing. You should continue to try different ways that your team has come up with to make sure. If you are totally confident you have found the right approach, that's great, but you should test it and test other variations as well to make sure that you really have the best way to perform. I will tell you that I would have bet money that a particular marketing ad it was the best looking one. I love the way it looked. And then we put it out there and it didn't perform. And the one that I was like, we went and tested it. I would have never chosen it and it did fantastic. I don't need to be right. I want to be effective. I want the best ad that's out there to attract our best clients to be being shown. And if that is one that's different than the one I like, fine. But often we pick it based on our own subjective preferences. And that isn't ultimately the best solution for what the use case is for our clients. So continue to test over and over. The next one is we want to reward and not punish. So there's QuickBooks has been pretty famous for, they have failure parties where they'll try to create something new inside of their service offerings or inside their program. And they actually have a party to talk about all the ways in which it didn't work, the ways in which they failed. This is to create that culture of it's okay to fail, it's okay to make a mistake, and at the same time to be transparent and share the information amongst everybody about what isn't working so that everyone can learn from it. I mean, I would love to talk about how I screwed up this week with a glass of wine in my hand. I'm going to have to talk about it, might as well be a party. So this is a great way to facilitate this. We have also seen other organizations do like the biggest mistake prize. Bring people together, whoever made the biggest mistake this week or this month, to give them a prize. A good friend of mine who I wrote the second book with, Kim Shepard, in her company, they had the Boo Boo of the Month award. Everyone would submit their things that they did. She would pick the best one and send that person a gift card. At People G2, we have a Oops, My Bad room in Slack. And that's where people can go and they can admit what they did, what they learned, and we celebrate them for that. We applaud them for having the courage to come in and admit it, right? And put it out there publicly for the whole company to see. So finding a way to make sure that we are reinforcing that we want this to happen. We care about this happening. We're not going to punish people, right, for trying new things and being innovative and finding new solutions or having new ideas or trying something different for a client. That's a good thing. We also want to try to choose transparency. Now, there's two great stories which you may have heard. They've been in lots of other books, but in case you haven't heard this story, there's two. The first one is with Zappos. They made a mistake very early on in the company's history. They were just kind of getting going. They were just becoming quite popular. And somebody put the wrong price on a shoe, like dramatically the wrong price. It was $20 for the shoe, and it should have been $100 or $80 or something significant. In fact, the price that was listed was less than their cost. And so a lot of people bought these shoes. They lost like $1.6 million or something like that. And instead of going back to their clients and saying, we made a mistake, we made an error, and we're going to cancel your order, and if you want to buy these shoes, this is the real price, right? Which they could have done. They had the wording and disclaimers on their site. They could have done that, right? But they didn't. Instead, they went back to all those clients and told them what happened and told them that they got to keep their shoes at that price. They would honor the price. It was on them. And then they got their PR people on it, and they went viral with this. It was in all kinds of newspapers and online blogs, and they used it as at Zappos, if we say something, we mean it. And if we make an error, it's on us, not on our client. And they used this as a way. Their sales went up by so much, they made up what they lost in a matter of a week or two. So they were able to leverage this and talk about it and use it as a PR stunt, which I thought was brilliant. That same thing happened to Southwest Airlines. Apparently, there was a legal name of they had needed to change some things, and the Southwest Airlines apparently was owned by somebody else. So they had checked and done all their research and done everything they could to make sure that nobody else owned this name. And they believed they were fine. They went forward. They started, put it on every plane. And then someone came along, some little tiny user, and said, "I own this trademark, or I own this name in this state." Somebody missed it. But they went back and looked and said, "We did everything we possibly could. There was no way we could have done this differently. So how do we deal with this? How do we handle this?" Well, the owner of Southwest Airlines, who's now passed away, but at that time, he was quite a character. And so he went on TV and he went in the newspapers and he challenged them to a boxing match. To whoever won the boxing match could keep the name. And he made it a PR stunt. And they got so much traction on this. And the other company who owned that, they got so much traction from it. Now, this guy, he tried to bring in a ringer. They did all these funny things around this event, and all this media there. Ultimately, that small little player happily changed their name, gave them for free that name, and because everyone was able to make something out of this, right? They became such a big deal. It was such a splash that they were able to take a negative and try to do a positive. But they were transparent about it. They were open about it. They talked about it. They didn't hide from it. Right? They didn't fire a bunch of people and then have to go change their name. They found a way to be open, honest, and have fun with it and leverage it. Another way that we can capitalize on our mistakes is to make sure that we have this as a policy, right? It should be a part of your ethos at your company. It is a deal breaker for you that people need to learn, grow, and own it. If we're not talking about mistakes, if you're actively avoiding talking about them, maybe you're not a good employee for us. Maybe you're not a good fit, right? This needs to be a deal breaker. We do not tolerate people who want to pretend that nothing bad happened, or they're not going to be willing to admit that something didn't go right, that they either should have known or need to learn from. This kind of institutionalizing it is kind of the next step, the elevated part of us making this really, really work. So make sure that we have kind of want to ensure that I've really talked about what are some of the key things I want to make sure that you are taking back with you. I want you to think about as you go back into your organizations and maybe reflect on this. First of all, make sure that your comp plans don't reinforce the hiding of mistakes. In fact, can they reward it? I have seen companies that are dealing with this issue and it is such a problem for them. And you look in their comp plans and leaders are literally have to reach a certain level of quality or a certain level of this. And if they ever were to admit a mistake, it could affect their bonus or their comp or their budget, right? If we have those kinds of institutional things in there, you're going to have people hiding from the truth. We want to make sure that the leaders are leading the way. I want to bring this up again. It has to go top down. Leaders have to lead the way as it relates to mistakes and talking about it, or it's never going to happen. And then make sure that we are celebrating it. This sounds funny. It sounds counterintuitive or maybe even a little uncomfortable at times, but you have to be willing to high five someone and say, way to go, way to screw it up. I'm glad you learned something. I'm glad you figured this out. I'm glad that we were able to realize that was the wrong way to go, and now we know the right way to go. And that takes practice, and that takes a new way of thinking. But man, that will embolden, that will make your people so loyal to you as a leader, right? When you're willing to be that kind of person, that they know that they can try things, that they may not have the right answer every time, and you're going to have their back. Again, with Southwest Airlines, they are famous for, they will always have their employees back. If their employee believes that they were doing the right thing for the customer, they will always have their back, and publicly, they will always support them. Privately, they may need to retrain. They may suggest that there be a different way they want them to handle that next time, but public, they will never blame the employee. They will back that employee if they believe they were doing the right thing. So that's the kind of leadership we want. That's how we want to handle this type of mistakes. So we're here at about 11:45. So I want to make sure we have a little time here for questions. We have about 5 minutes or so, I think, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more here. And then, so if you have questions, go ahead and start putting them into the chat. Danielle will start to tag them. That way we can get to them. If you have specific questions around mistakes and errors and maybe some situations happening in your company, I'd love for you to throw those up there. And in just a moment, we'll come back to it. So let's, I'll just kind of go into the last little bit here. I may not have time to get to it all, but go ahead and pop those in as you have them. And I'm not sure if I'm seeing them yet or not, so I will look in a moment. Perfect. So one of the areas that we want to make sure we're doing is creating spaces for this to happen, and creating spaces for people to have real conversations. And so I love this exercise called Designating the Devil, which comes from David Marquet, one of my favorite authors, and we've had him on the radio show many times. And this is an exercise where if you're all together, you could do it this way. If you're not, you'll have to come up with a different strategy. But you know, if you handed out playing cards to everyone sitting there, maybe you had 2 jacks in the deck, and that 2 of the 7 people you're meeting with would get those jacks. And if they get those, or you could hand out a piece of paper, however you want to do it, but let them know not to show what they got, but if they got the jack, that they need to disagree. They need to be the devil's advocate. They need to push and prod and find ways to go the opposite direction of what is being suggested. What I love about this exercise, it gives people permission to disagree, regardless of whose idea it was. And this is especially great if it's the leader whose idea it is. It gives them the actual permission to disagree. Now, you have your meeting, and then usually what we do is we go around the room and ask who they think the devils are. And they usually get one of them right immediately. But rarely do they get the second person correct. Because what happens is when there's 2 people disagreeing, everyone else starts disagreeing too. They're willing to say what they really think. They're willing to poke holes and say, maybe we shouldn't do it this way. There might be a better way to do it. Or at my old company, this is how we did it. Instead of just nodding and saying, okay, yeah, I guess that works. The boss wants to do it that way. I'm just going to shut up and not have an argument here. This is a wonderful exercise for us to help breed that kind of conversation that can help us avoid errors and maybe take some good chances. We may make a few mistakes along the way, but take better chances going forward. We also want to make sure that we are tying all of this to our big, hairy, audacious goal. Jim Collins talked about this. What is our big, giant goals in organization, right? If you are a $10 million company today and you want to get to 50 million, you're going to need innovation. You're going to need to try new things. You're going to need people willing to try new things. And if you are tying this to, hey, we're trying to go from 10 to 50, we need people to come up with bigger ideas and to try things. If you're trying to go from 10 to 11 and then you're going to be happy, kind of status quo. It's not the same kind of organization, right? It's not the same kind of place that we want to be. So it's really important that everyone understands what is that big goal, and that's why we want them to be innovative and to try. Just for the sake of time here, so I think I'm going to skip this last one. I've talked about the aggregation of marginal gains, but how do you get a little bit better without getting a little bit worse all the time, and thinking about how do we improve over time, versus how do we go from 0 to a 25% change overnight. That just isn't plausible or probable. It's more likely, how do we get 25% better by getting 1% better at a time every week or every month or every day, whatever that is. Okay. Thank you so much to AccuSource and People G2 for putting on this free webinar today and having me speak. If you're interested in learning more about their background checks and what they have to offer, please let us know. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get to any questions that we have. I don't know if I'm Danielle. I don't know. Is there a question? Oh, maybe here's the question button.
That is correct, Chris. We don't have any
questions
questions as of yet.
Okay, so if you have a question, please pop it into the chat area. Otherwise, you can always send us a note directly if you want to do that. But yeah, it could be a first if we don't have any questions. That could be a first. I'll give it just a second. I guess not. Oh, here we go. How do you change culture if leadership is not on board? This question is from Andrew. It's an excellent question. Unfortunately, I'm going to give you a not so excellent answer. You can't. So I often tell people, if they're in a situation where the leadership will not change and that's frustrating them, they probably are the only thing that can change. You can go find another job where you align better with the culture or the leadership that suits you. So if they aren't willing to do it, it's not going to happen. They have to be willing to be a part of that process. You could, if you have a very siloed team, if you can kind of really do things in such a way that you have a lot of control just with your team, you can really create a really good culture inside of that smaller group, and you'll have some insulation. And I know a lot of people that's how they kind of live inside their work. But if that's not possible, then you really have to have leadership there. Natalie says, is there any concern that the pendulum will swing too far and mistakes become rampant? No. So when it's mistakes, there's no such thing as being too rampant, because mistakes are good things. And we want people to try things. And if they're constantly learning and trying and iterating and talking about it, it becomes a focus of a good thing, right? So this is not people just randomly trying things just to try things. This is not going to go to where they're just going to do whatever they want whenever they want. Oh, let's just try this and see what happens and cost the company $10,000. When we're open and honest about it, there's still that pressure, right, for us to have done our best to perform and to have given our best effort, right? So I haven't ever seen that kind of swing that way. No, in no organization, and even those that have the most openness about mistakes, I've never seen it swing the way that you asked. How can we bring up biggest mistake prizes to management? This is from Anton. So I think it's great. Go in and maybe look up the QuickBooks example. Look up biggest mistake prizes or parties. You can go and Google it and get some other examples. But I would take that example that best fits what you guys do, what your company does. If, let's say, you're creating software like QuickBooks creates software, you could show them, hey, they've had this really good documented success by having this party to talk about these things, and that's been a part of their innovation story. Why don't we consider that, right? You may need to bring in a consultant or someone to help you with some of that, but I would say finding a good example of a company that's done something like this that has a parallel to your company, and it's a really easy way to say, hey, I noticed that this company, who's a lot like us, is doing this thing by having great success. What do you think about it? And letting them kind of hopefully kind of make it their own idea. That's something that they want to do. I've seen great success in getting the CEO or a COO or senior leader to really think about doing it. And often what they want is innovation. They want people to have good ideas, and it isn't often them that's really against that. It's kind of that layer of management right below them that is often the barrier. So if you can get that person up top on board, it usually will work really well. Perfect. Those were really good questions. If anyone has any others, pop them in there. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Danielle to do the wrap up. I know all you probably have questions on the presentation and the credits.
Give people just a bit more time to type in their questions if they have any. And if not, then we'll go ahead and close it out. All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for facilitating this informative webinar, and a special thank you to our attendees for joining us today. To recap, your HRCI insurance credits will be emailed to you within the next few hours if you were in attendance for the full duration of the live webinar. A link to the recording of this presentation will be sent to each attendee within 24 to 48 hours. Please feel free to visit our resource section of our website at www.accusource-online.com, where you will find our full webinar library as well as other valuable compliance and educational resources. If you have any additional questions, please contact us at marketing@accusource-online.com. On behalf of People G2 and the AccuSource team, we wish you all an incredible day.